Welcome to the first episode of UFOP StarBase 118 RPG's podcast for the year of 2393. I am your host, Colonel Nugra of the USS Doyle. Hello all, welcome to the first podcast of the year. I'm your host, Colonel Nugra of the USS Doyle, and I'm proud to bring you the hard work and dedication of the podcast team. After a small hiatus, the podcast team is dedicated to bringing you news, interviews, and great segments for your listening enjoyment. First, we would like to welcome the new members who graduated the Academy in the month of January.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Commander Alora DeVoe of the USS Invicta, and today I have the privilege of welcoming the new members to the fleet. For the month of January, we have 7 new members and 1 returning member, and they are Lieutenant Commander Safine Tan of the USS Gorgon, Ensign Azure Dawn of the USS Invicta, Ensign Ronan Alikos of the USS Apollo, Ensign Michelle Tonston of the USS Doyle, Ensign Mercedes Princess of the Doranis Embassy, Ensign Liani of StarBase 118 Ops, Ensign Kajak of the USS Gorkon, and Ensign Alyssa Renato of the USS Doyle, and last but not least, Ensign Zahn Roby of the USS Doyle. Welcome to the fleet.
This is the Federation News Service. A starship construction company on Belarus 9 announced a new and controversial business venture to create a drone fleet to augment Starfleet and planetary defense forces in the Bolian system, with possible expansion across the Federation. The Bolax Group, a long-established and prestigious starship construction business, reached out to Federation members, hoping to acquire old and decommissioned starships, which would be disassembled for duranium, tritanium, and other assorted metals used in starship construction. We have too many decommissioned starships, both within Starfleet, the merchant sector, and the civilian sector, explained Chakran, the CEO of the Bolax Group. And with the current problems the Federation is facing with the lithium production slowing down and an overstretched Starfleet, now is the time to consider downsizing the number of ships permanently, dry docked, and collecting dust in the shipyards. It is worth a consideration, said the Vulcan ambassador Palak in attendance of the announcement, to replace a manned starship with a device capable of patrolling, defending, and providing data is a logical approach until the problem of limited dilithium has been resolved. Not all were in agreement, though. Bridget Ponfar, the Terran representative protesting the initiative, responded, saying, "We're talking about placing the lives of the Federation in unmanned drone units that are incapable of the physical person, where logic, instinct, creativity, intuitiveness play an important part. A drone unit is incapable of that, and how are they to determine what is and isn't a threat?"
Today we have a special treat. With the recent discovery of unaired content in our archives, the podcast team would like to present an interview that we had last year with Melinda Snodgrass, the writer of not only the science fiction book The Edge of Reason, but also the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Ensigns of Command. The interview was conducted by Alora DeVoe of the USS Invicta. Here it is.
Now, as you all know, we all wear many hats. We're all sons or daughters to somebody. Some of us are husbands and wives, or mothers and fathers, or siblings. Outside of SB 118, we're employees. Maybe we're employers. We're friends, confidants, or competition. Some of us are homemakers, engineers, members of the government, or programmers. But whatever we are, we're different things to different people and in different situations. Now today, I'm interviewing a very special lady who has worn quite a few hats of her own, a musician, a businesswoman, a lawyer, but now we mainly know her as an author. Our special guest today is none other than Melinda Snodgrass. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Snodgrass.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me, and call me Melinda because otherwise I'll look for my mother if you call me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm so excited to interview you. And I know that we are a Star Trek writing club and that you have been a part of the Star Trek universe. But I also know that there's a lot more to you than that. So I'd really would like to get to know more about you in general. And I wanted to ask you if you would share something about you from the beginning, about yourself growing up.
Sure. Ironically, I was born in Los Angeles. And my dad was business partners with a lot of people in the movie business. So actually, one of the first people who held me when I came home from the hospital was apparently Spencer Tracy.
Wow.
But I don't remember that because I was a baby. But we only lived in Hollywood for about 5 months after my birth. And then we moved to New Mexico, which is where I grew up. And I love New Mexico dearly. So that's where I spent my life. I had an amazing father. We were very, very, very close. He was much older than my mother, but he was, my inspiration. He was a guy who'd done everything. I mean, I'd love to write a book about him, but this is one of those things that when he was alive, I didn't think to sit him down and tape all of these conversations because I never thought I was going to become a writer. But he was a jazz musician. He had a Dixieland jazz band and a nightclub in 1929. He played 5 instruments and sang. After the Depression, when he lost his nightclub because the bank foreclosed on him, he ended up becoming a businessman. In Los Angeles, he was in what was called the wired music business, which was a really weird little thing where you would call on a phone from a restaurant and then they would play pipe music to your table. But it was a cash-only business, so the mob was always trying to move in on him. So he used to have to play poker with the mob boss of Los Angeles on Tuesday nights.
Wow.
And he had to lose just enough. He couldn't make it obvious he was losing. So he had this amazing life. And I was sort of his second son. I had a half brother who was 27 years older than I was. But I had all of my dad's drive and ambition. And so he kind of just supported me totally. I mean, he let me try anything I wanted. Horses and fencing, and he taught me to swim almost. And when I was 7, he taught me to read before I went to school. He read a book a night. He's that kind of guy.
Wow.
And let me go to Europe to study opera. He was thrilled when I could sing because he was a musician. And my mother couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, so it was very for him. And so he let me go to Vienna to study opera when I was 18 actually. And it was his dream that I become a lawyer. And, I loved him so much that I did it. But that was kind of, I really, really am pleased I have the education. It was great. But I only practiced for 3 years. And because I realized that while I love the law as kind of an intellectual thing, I kind of didn't like lawyers very much. So I ended up quitting. But the thing that kind of pushed me to quit was my best friend at the time was a writer named Victor Milan, and he was going to barbecue after there was a autographing, a sort of giant mass autographing at a bookstore in the mall, and I came over to say hi. And afterwards, they were all going to go to a barbecue at a man named Fred Saberhagen's house. And Fred Saberhagen, very famous science fiction writer, wrote the Berserker series and
Right.
Holmes Wild, great guy. So Vic said, "Can I bring Melinda?" And everybody said, "Sure." And there was Susie McKee-Charnas and Roger Zelazny and Fred. I mean, just all of these incredible people at this barbecue.
And I'm shaking my head going, oh, yes, I know that name. I know that name. I know that name.
And so I walked through this room listening to people, not Connie, sorry. Susie was talking about the effects of language on culture. And Fred was reading a letter from a lunatic in Romania who said he was the multi-son of Dracula. But as he read on through this 8-page handwritten letter, it got crazier and crazier. And then you realize the guy was claiming he was actually Dracula and a vampire. And he was reading that letter to gales of laughter. And I mean, it was just this amazing group of people. And I was with lawyers and they were talking about their billable hours, and it was boring. And I thought, these are the most interesting people in the world. So I said to Vic, gosh, I really want to be part of this. And he said, I bet you could write if you tried. So I started writing kind of in secret, with Vic mentoring me, and didn't say anything to anybody until I'd managed to sell a book. So that was sort of, and then I was miserable in this law firm. And so I quit one afternoon. I realized that if I didn't, I was going to be 60 years old, bitter and angry, and terrorizing some young associate the way I was being terrorized. And I thought, I don't want to do this, I'm going to take the leap. So I did. And that was, that was where it all started. So, that's sort of my background. I had a dad who encouraged me to try almost anything, and enabled me to get a, first-class education. And even though I didn't ultimately practice law very long, and my dad died shortly after I finished taking the bar exam. So in some ways it was liberating. I miss him a lot, but if he had lived, I don't know if I would have walked away from his dream for me instead of my own dream, But like I said, the education has been invaluable. I mean, it's the basis of the spec script I wrote for Star Trek. It's the basis of these series of books that I write is Philippa Bornikova, which is about a young woman lawyer working in a vampire law firm in New York. I worked on a show called Reasonable Doubts, which was a lawyer show, cop and lawyer show. And so I think without that training, I would never have gotten the opportunities that I've had. So nothing is wasted.
So you've kind of answered my next question about why you decided to leave law. Now, you had mentioned before that you got into horseback riding, and from what I understand, you actually still occasionally compete in dressage?
I do. I haven't done it this year because I need a new show coat. Actually, I need 2 new show coats. I just haven't had the energy. I'm small. I'm only 5'1", and
You're the same height I am.
Well, and I'm really short-waisted, and trying to buy a fancy FEI shad belly coat, I can't find anything that fits. So my only option is to buy one too big and have it tailored. Except my current coach in Los Angeles has said, no, I have a woman who will make you a coat. Except she and I haven't managed to get that set up. So I haven't been showing. I've been letting her campaign my horse Vento. Right now I'm suffering because I came back to New Mexico for a few weeks for various reasons. We were doing a remembrance of Roger Zelazny. Forgive me, let me get focused.
That's okay.
Miss my horse because he's still in California, because I realized I was going to bring him home to New Mexico, and then I realized I have to travel all summer. I've got convention after convention and an autograph tour that Tor is sending me on, and I thought, I've got nobody here at the barn that can ride and exercise this horse, and he's a pistol, and I don't want to come back from days at Worldcon and have to deal with him being a snot. And so I decided, given my situation this summer, I was better off leaving him in LA. And so I'm going home to my other home on Sunday, back to LA to do some business and to also mostly see my horse. I miss him so much. I ride 5 days to 6 days a week.
Wow.
I don't miss. When you're riding at the upper levels at FEI, you really have to ride. And in between, I go to the gym and I hike and I do a million crunches because it takes a huge amount of strength to ride at that level.
Yeah. I've never done any high level of dressage, but I've done a little bit when I was younger. I did a little bit. And yeah, it's a lot more work than people realize.
I know, because it looks like if you're doing it right, you just sort of look like you're sitting there elegantly and nobody has any idea how hard you're working. And, especially when you're trying to get those tempi changes and you have to only do 11 of them and, they'll ding you if you do 10 or if you do 12. And so you're kind of, I love it. I mean, it is the sport for people with OCD though, I mean, definitely, because you're like, I didn't stop precisely at A, oops. I picked up that canter 1 stride too late.
I'm not the least bit OCD. Oh no, I'm not.
Well, I figure I must be, or I wouldn't be. I haven't been doing the sport for as long as I have.
It's really neat. I love watching it. It's such a beautiful sport. It's one of my favorite parts of the Olympics, and they never show it.
Show it. Well, what you do is you go find, I have on my Facebook page, because people are always saying, well, what do you do on your horse? And so I have a link to a gold medal ride, a horse, Blue Oars, what is her name? I can't remember. She was a Dutch horse and sadly died young, but it was one of those beautiful freestyles ever ridden. Wow. So I sort of go watch this. Okay. I don't do it that well, but this is what
it'll give you an idea.
Yeah. It'll give you an idea of what dressage is. I mean, I love it because, I'm a science fiction nerd and have been since I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And for me, especially riding dressage, is the closest thing to telepathy you're ever going to experience. Because when Vinto and I are really cooking,
you're completely in sync.
Yes, and I can just think half pass, and suddenly we're, doing a canter half pass across the entire width of the arena, and I know what's really I know what's really happening. There's subtle shifts in my muscle tone,
right?
But it feels like I thought half pass, and he went half pass. Okay. Right. It's wonderful. I just love this sport. So
now, besides horses, you have been involved in a lot of things, including music, and I have a love of horses, and I have a love of science fiction, and I'm a former music major, so I feel like I have a lot in common with you. You actually, I was studying opera at the University of North Texas. I was a vocal performance major and studying opera there, but you actually went to Vienna. You went to Vienna. Oh my goodness. And I'm going, she went abroad. She studied opera with probably some of the best people in the world. Tell me what that was like, please.
It was amazing. It was funny because when I was 14, I guess, my dad decided that it was time to send me for proper vocal training. And he sent me to an old jazz guy who was a friend of his to be trained because, Dad's vision was that I was going to become a crooner, really great jazz crooner.
Not your style.
He sent me off to this guy, and we worked together for about 2 weeks. And to his credit, I think this man did a terrific thing. He called my dad and he said, she has a classical voice and I can't train this. I don't know how. And he said, you need to find a classical coach for her. And then he said, let me do some research. And so he recommended a woman who had also studied in Vienna, Austria, and sent me to this woman, and she became my teacher, and I studied with her from the time I was 14 until I was 18. And then she said, I think it would be good for you to, go and see what this is like, and if you really want this to be your life. And my dad, who I told you was fabulous and always supported me, said, okay, we'll let her go. So I went off to school at the Conservatorium der Stadt Wien to study music. And I was there for about a year and a half with a woman named Frau Zadek, was my teacher. And I learned a lot and I had a lot of fun. But what it taught me is that I have a very nice voice, but I didn't have a world-class voice. Mm-hmm. And there were people there who were that 0.1% that you're going to hear at the Met or in, at La Scala. Oh, yeah. And I was good, but I wasn't that good. And I had a correpetitor, or an accompanist, who would rehearse with me. And he was married to an American Wagnerian soprano who was like 5 times bigger than he was. It was kind of hilarious. Wow. And I'd go to their flat and rehearse with him for, my lessons and concerts. And one day he said to me, you have a very nice little voice, appropriate for the operetta stage, maybe small opera houses. But he said, but you're also smart. And he said, why are you here? You're wasting your life. And because you're never going to have a big career. And, I was 19 years old and I was devastated because I'd had this big dream. I was going to be a great opera singer. But I went back to my little apartment and I cried. And then I thought it through. And then I rode the tram downtown Vienna to call home because this was like before the time of cell phones.
Right.
And I said, look, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to, and I think I want to come home. And he said, okay. So I came home and finished my education, got a degree in history with a minor in music. And then I went on to law school because that was his dream. And I kept singing all the time. I mean, while I was in law school, I starred in Civic Light. We have a Civic Light opera in Albuquerque, a very good one at the time. And so I sang Guinevere and Camelot. And I was, did a lot of singing while I was going through law school because that was the only way I didn't go crazy. So I love music still. I learned to play the piano, but I wasn't fabulous. But I was, I was an okay pianist. But I'm so excited because the Santa Fe Opera is doing the Daughter of the Regiment this year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so in fact, that was one of the things I have to do tomorrow is I've got to get a ticket lined up because I really want to go see the Daughter of the Regiment. It's one of my favorite operas.
Okay, SB118 peeps, pause the podcast, go look it up, get educated, and then come back.
Donizetti, Daughter of the Regiment, great fun, comic opera. Love it.
I'm partial to Rossini myself. I love his La Cenerentola. It's my favorite. I've never seen any opera live. I've always seen it recorded. One day, and I want to go to the Met. I want to go see it at the Met.
I have been there twice, and it's unfortunately one of the times I went to the Met, one of my editors years ago took me, and they were doing Tosca, and it was an off night, and it was overcast, and it wasn't great, and we had the poor baritone who was singing Scarpia and was having so much trouble, so it wasn't probably the best. But here in New Mexico, we have the Santa Fe Opera, which is, and of course I went to the opera in Vienna. We'd go standing room, all the students, because it was cheap.
Yeah, yeah.
We'd have dinner and then drink some wine and then go over to the opera house and get in line for standing room. And then we'd stand and see all these operas. And, I'm an uptight little American girl. I'd never been, in Europe, they boo, they don't like it. They boo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So startled by this behavior. And this was, of course, proper Austrians too, but they were like, boo,
Yep.
When the singer wasn't good or
I've heard all about it.
Yeah, it was a different experience coming from the States where we're all so polite, But, I listen to music while I write. I listen to music while I work out. Sadly, when I got the job on Star Trek, I was still studying. I had a voice coach, but I went to California thinking I'd get a new coach, and then the Trek job turned into this multi-hour, I would work like 14 hours, 16 hours a day, and I was exhausted by the time it was over that I kind of stopped singing.
Yeah.
And, as it's you have to keep the instrument in shape,
Yeah, I know very well. I used to have a 3.5 octave range, and no longer.
Yeah, well, and then when I got diagnosed with a sort of rare little weird disease that I lost my high C. It's like I didn't have. I even had a high E because I was a coloratura. I was one of those,
Yes.
and so I had the incredible range, but I lost my upper range because I didn't have the strength. And so I'm trying to decide if I'm going to start singing, seriously, doing some vocalese, although it makes the cats crazy when I do vocalese.
That's another thing we have in common. I have cats too.
All
right. Well, yeah, I love cats. What can I say?
Me too.
So you kind of segued into the next question that I had for you when you mentioned Hollywood. How did that start? I mean, you go from being a musician to a history major with a music minor to a lawyer. You start writing kind of underground. All of a sudden, you're successful because you're a good writer. And now Hollywood starts calling, or did you call Hollywood? How did that happen?
Well, no. How this happened is there's a guy you people might have heard of. We're very proud of him. We think he's done pretty well. A guy named George R.R. Martin.
That sounds
ring a bell?
familiar. Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Didn't he write that
fantasy
Game of Thrones or something like that?
Yeah. Ice and Fire. So long before George was Mr. Game of Thrones, Mr. Ice and Fire, George had moved to New Mexico, and we got to know each other, and we were in a role-playing group together, and George ran games for us, and other people ran games for us, and George ran a game for us called Super World. Out of Superworld came a series of books that George and I co-created and we co-edit together called Wild Cards.
And guys, if you have not read these books, they are fantastic. This was actually my introduction to Melinda Snodgrass, were the Wild Card books. And actually my husband was the one who introduced those to me. So you have Kurt to thank for that. If you haven't read them, check them out. They are really good.
Well, and George and I are just about to deliver book number 23.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, because you had 22. I knew you had 22.
Yeah, high stakes is pretty much assembled, ready to go. I have to go over to George's office to check on some stuff and make sure this one last little piece gets slotted in, and then book goes. But so anyway,
role-playing game.
We were in role-playing games. We were playing, we played all kinds of role-playing games. And George ran Superworld, and we played Morrow Project. We played all these games. I was writing. At this point, I had finally sold, so I didn't feel like a fraud. And so I was part of this community of, Fred Saberhagen and Roger Zelazny and George Martin and, me, the little baby writer. And George went off to Hollywood. George first went out to Hollywood to work on the new Twilight Zone. And then he got hired on the show called Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, I didn't know he worked on that.
Yeah, he worked on Beauty and the Beast back when it was Linda Hamilton.
Yeah, and then she got replaced by somebody else later on, but...
Right, because she, quit. And so I'm home in New Mexico, and I'm missing my buddy George, because George and I are really, really close friends. George is out in Los Angeles, and he calls me up, and he says, you're really good at dialogue, and you really create strong characters, and you're really good at plotting, and that really is kind of what is needed in Hollywood. And, I think you'd be pretty good at the screenwriting thing, which kind of echoed Vic saying, I bet you could write if you tried. He's like, I think you'd be good at this. And he said, if you write a spec script, I'll give it to my agent. I went, okay. So I sat there and I thought about, I'm going to back up a little bit. A spec script is your calling card. You write something, and at the time I broke in, you would usually write a spec of a show that was already on the air. And then if it was, good, you could get an agent, and then your agent would send it around to possible producers, writer-producers on shows, and if they liked it, they might have you come in, and if you came in, you would get to pitch another story for that show. And George told me, he said, now, you must understand, Melinda, that nobody ever, 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 ever sells their spec script. They never sell their spec script. This is just a calling card. All it's designed to do is get you in the door. And I went, okay. So I sat down and thought, all right, I got to write the spec script. And I had three choices. I could write something for LA Law. I could write something for Beauty and the Beast, or I could write something for Star Trek Next Generation. Well, Beauty and the Beast was right out, because I thought, if I write a really shitty script, then George is faced with having to tell me it's a really shitty script, or he shows it to his bosses and then they think he's an idiot because he's showing them the shitty script, and it puts him on the spot. So that was right out. LA Law looked like it was so tightly plotted, and like they had plotted so far into the future, that I thought, I don't know how you kind of sneak in and write anything for them. And I had grown up on original Trek. I mean, I was a little kid when original Trek came on, and it was like, this was all of my dreams made manifest on a TV screen. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna write a Star Trek script. So I sat and taped a bunch of the first episodes of the very first season, and I watched them. And I decided Data was the most interesting character, which was kind of ironic considering that he was a robot. And I wrote a script called The Measure of a Man. And I did it completely wrong the first time. It was the margins were off, and it was too long, and I had to rewrite it and get the margins right, because they didn't have these really nifty screen programs at the time. They had Scriptor. But I got it done, and I got it to George, and he gave it to his agent, and she prepared to send it in, and the writers' strike hit. They were on strike for 6 months. So I forgot about it. I continued living in New Mexico, riding my horses, playing games with my buddies, writing my books. And then 6 months later, I get this call from my agent at the time, and she says, they want to see you on Trek. They want to have a meeting with you. So I flew to LA and went into Morris Hurley's office, who was the exec producer in charge of the writing staff at that time. And I walked in, and I had my little tiny 3x5 cards with 3 more Star Trek stories on them, because I was ready to pitch, because George had told me that that's how pitches work. And Maury did the, tell me about yourself. So I told him a little about myself. And then I said, oh, and I have some stories for you. And I started to pitch. Maury leans across his desk, and he goes, shh. He shushes me. Shh. And he points up on the wall behind him, where there was a big whiteboard that had a list of all the upcoming episodes and when they were going to shoot, when prep was, when they were shooting, and The Measure of a Man was on the board. So they bought my script. And George, at the time, Beauty and the Beast's offices were just down from Paramount Studios, about 3 miles. So I drove over to George's office and walked in. And George, to this day, says, I don't think your feet were touching the ground. I mean, you were floating. And I said, I sold my script. So he has just going, God, Melinda, you always break all the rules. I give people these rules, and then there's you, and then you break all the rules. I sold the script. There was another note session where at the end of the note session, I had to come back to LA for a note session. And at the end of that 3 hours, Maury looked at me and he said, I'm hiring you. You start on Monday. This was on Thursday. Go home to New Mexico, find a house sitter for my animals and some of the horses, get in a car and drive back to LA and find an apartment, and also get a horse out to keep me company. I brought my beautiful Arabian mare, Rocky, with me. And I went back to LA and I went to work on Star Trek. So that's how I went to Hollywood. But I owe my chance to George Martin, and I'm forever grateful to him.
That's a whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind. And I've got to say that George gave me the first piece of best advice I've ever had as a writer. Because when I was planning to write this spec, I said to George, I've got this idea for this script based on the Dred Scott decision, which is what Measure of a Man is.
Right.
But it's a great idea, and I feel like I ought to save it for the pitch, because if I'm not going to sell the spec script, I hate to waste this incredible idea on a spec script that won't sell. And George said to me, never hoard your silver bullet, meaning lead with the best thing you've got.
Right.
So I did, and he was right. And so that is the first piece of the best advice I've ever gotten for writing. And the second best advice I've ever gotten was from my boss on Star Trek, Maurice Hurley. I had a tendency to, be very subtle and kind of hide the football and so on and so on. And at one point, Maury, on a particular script, said to me, Melinda, just say the words. Just say the words. And there are times when you just need to say the words. And so those are kind of the two pieces that are always sitting on my shoulder as I write, with the advice that works for me. And then I went on and did a lot of other stuff in Hollywood.
Yeah. You worked on Sliders. You've done all sorts of stuff.
I was on Reasonable Doubts. I was a producer on Profiler. I wrote 5 TV pilots, only one of which ever got made and didn't unfortunately go to series. I've written feature films. I've done a lot of stuff. But
it's amazing how much you've accomplished. From what I understand, writing a script is a little bit different from writing a book or even a short story. How does that differ?
I actually prefer writing scripts over prose. I'm a kind of a natural screenwriter. That's where my talents lie. I think the major differences are that if you're going to be a screenwriter, you have to be able to plot really well. You have to be ferociously good at structure because you have such a limited amount of time to tell your story in. So every scene and literally every word that falls out of an actor's mouth has to have a point. You can't just have a lovely scene that gives people a sense of the character. I mean, you may want that scene to explicate character, but that scene also has to do something to move that story forward. So if you prefer big, sprawling stories where you can take a lot of time, screenwriting probably isn't where you are going to want to live, because you've got to really be focused. Dialogue is really all that matters. When you turn in a script to a potential buyer, many of the first readers at the studios, and certainly these top executives, they don't even read stage directions because they don't have time. They read the dialogue, which is right down the middle of the page. And if they can't follow it and they're not intrigued by just reading the dialogue, you're dead. You're not going to sell that project. What I do is sometimes if it's really important, something that's going on in the stage direction, I will do all caps and underline it so that it will catch their eye and they'll at least notice that little piece there. But so it's good structure, really strong dialogue, and characters, really powerful characters with strong voices that stand out. In prose, I think you need all those things too, but you also really need an ability to do description, which is actually something I hate to do. And so that's actually the thing my crit group, I'm usually getting yelled at about, where are they, Melinda? This is beautiful dialogue, but they could be in a white room. So I try really hard now when I'm writing my books to go, I have got to have 3 of the 5 senses in every scene. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they smell? Touch something, because that's probably a weakness for me. But different. And any program can, anything like Pages or Word, you can write a story or a book. You really kind of do need special software to write a script. And the industry standard is something called Final Draft, which is what I use and everybody else uses. It's a great program, and that kind of it's idiot proof. It will help you know. It kind of knows. Oh, it's time to have dialogue now. Oh, I'll throw the character name in. Or I bet you probably want action at this point. And so until you get smooth with it, it kind of helps you out and takes you by the hand and tells you how to do this. So, having the right tools. Scrivener, which is the word processing program that I use to write my novels, also has a screenplay function. I don't know how good it is because I've never used it, because I use the thing that I know I can send to any agent, producer, director, and they can read it in Hollywood, which is Final Draft. So for anybody who wants to get into screenwriting, get Final Draft.
So while you were working on Star Trek The Next Generation, what was your favorite part about doing that? What did you like the most about being a part of that series?
Probably working in a writer's room with my buddies. I think writing is such a lonely, isolating profession. And that's actually one of the things I love about Hollywood is when you're on a staff on a show and you're in a writer's room, there's something really nice about being able to walk to the office next door and go, I'm kind of stuck on this scene. Can I just kind of bounce some ideas off you? And I was working with Rick Manning and Hans Beimler, and with our immediate boss, who is Ira Bear. Ira is a terrific writer and just a wonderful human being, and I learned a lot from Ira. It was Ira and Ricky and Hans who taught me how to break a story, is how you call it in Hollywood, where we'd have a whiteboard, or you can use a cork board with cards. That's what we did on Profiler. And you literally plot the entire episode, teaser, act 1, act 2, act 3, act 4, act 5, and then you put all the scenes in, and they taught me all of these tricks for plotting that I use not only on my screenplays, but I use them on my novels as well. And before I start a novel, I have the cards and the board. And, I learned all these tricks from them, like each character has a different colored pin. Because when you do that, you can see if a character drops out and you lose track of them. You need to give them more, or maybe they don't belong in this thing at all, if they're not showing up enough. That, for me, was my favorite part. I mean, I've got to be honest, Star Trek was a very weird show. And it's a first experience, I didn't realize how weird it was. It wasn't until I went on to more normal shows that I realized how, we were not permitted on the set, which is kind of unheard of because it was a weird show. Once I went to work on Reasonable Doubts, you get bored, you're tired of sitting in your office, you wander over the set and you see what's going on. And it's also, they wouldn't let us watch dailies on Trek. And I didn't realize how important that was until I went to work on Reasonable Doubts, because when you watch the dailies every day, you suddenly begin to realize, like certain actors, don't give Mark Harmon that line. That's a really hard thing for Mark to say. And you don't know that unless you're watching the film coming off the set every day. And so there were, all of these strange things about Star Trek, which is why when I say I enjoyed the people I worked with, it's kind of, that was the thing that we mostly got to do. Mm-hmm. And so, I had good people and I learned a lot from them. And so I'm very grateful for that. But it was a very peculiar show. I think they were just terrified that we were all going to go squee or something because it was Trek and it had this sort of fan following. And it was like, no, we're not going to go squee because A, we're professionals, and B, actors can drive you crazy. You learn that very fast. I couldn't understand the first time I went out to visit George why everybody was wandering around the set of Beauty and the Beast going, actors, why do there have to be 15 actors? Sorry. And I was like, but actors are cool. And then about 6 weeks later, I was over in George's office going, actors, why do there have to be 15 actors? And so, it's really helpful if you get to be immersed in the entire process. My boss on Reasonable Doubts would have me in the editing room while he was editing episodes I wrote. I learned a lot from that. Good editor can save your life. Good editor can save a script. You can rewrite it in the editing room. You can go, wait, no, move that scene, forget that scene over here, put it over here. Really helpful. So.
Yeah, I think I'm a better editor than I am a writer. But
well, if you're a good editor, you're probably going to be a good writer. The wonderful thing about writing is nobody has to give you permission.
I do it for fun. Okay, so now my next question: would you have done anything differently,
career-wise, or in the script, or?
How about both? Why don't we start with career-wise? Would you have done anything differently?
I would have probably not tried to get so deeply into development. I liked being on staff on a TV show. And if I had stayed on the staff track, I would probably still be working today, but I've had a big hiatus. Instead, my agent was pushing me to start writing TV pilots, partly because if you get a show that gets picked up and goes to series, you and your agent are going to get rich. So if you're a talented enough writer and networks and studios want you to write pilots, your agents are really going to want you to write pilots. The problem is that if you don't win, if you don't hit the jackpot, you kind of fall off the staff track, and then all the people that you used to work with have either retired or they've moved on or they've died or whatever, and it's very hard to get back on the staff track. And so I think if he had explained to me that when I was a younger writer starting out in Hollywood, I might have made the same decision, but at least I would have known I was making a decision. Kind of didn't know I was. And that's probably the thing I would have done different, because I really do love being on the staff of a TV show. It's so much fun to be with a bunch of talented, writers and actors and directors and just creating something. I mean, there's something really, really fun about it. First time you hear an actor say their lines on a set, it's like the highest high I've ever had.
What about with what you did with Star Trek? Is there anything that you would change in any of the episodes that you worked on?
I mean, some of this is, as I look back when I watched the extended version of Measure, I'm really glad a lot of those scenes went back in, but there were like baby mistakes I made. I had an awful lot of people, knock, 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 come in, how are you, please sit down, Data, all this stuff that didn't need to be there. I think if I could rewrite that script now, it would be a much tighter script. I mean, there are scripts I very much regret. What happened on Ensigns of Command, that is not the script that I wrote. The version that I wrote is on my website under writings. You can actually read my version of it. But, in Hollywood, it happens. And you've got a lot of people in the mix who have the power to kind of mess things up. I have had scripts that got messed up. Some of that is just the nature of the business, and some of that was Star Trek because it was a weird show. But, that's the major thing. I mean, I wish I could do Measure without some of my mistakes, and I wish that Ensigns could have been shot the way I wrote it, because I really was proud of that script. And the other regret I have is I wanted to do a triptych about Data. The first one was Measure, is he a person of property? The second one was Data has to learn how to command, how to lead, and that sometimes command is a very ephemeral thing that has nothing to do with logic. And then I wanted to do an episode where Data has to commit a murder. He has to premeditate and commit a murder. For good reason, of course. It would have been because it's one of those. But I really wanted to write that episode. Can he get around his programming? If so, how? And what does that do? And what are the fallout from that? I never got to write that episode. So that's also one of my regrets. But, overall, hey, it launched my career. I learned a lot from Maury and Ira and the boys. And then I got to go on to Reasonable Doubts, which was an absolutely great show, very well run, and where I learned what it's really like to be a writer-producer in Hollywood, which is go to dailies, go to the set, be in casting, all those things that we didn't get to do on Star Trek.
Is it correct to assume that Data was your favorite Star Trek character?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the ironic reason is he was actually the most human of all of them. He was the most interesting character, and
You're
I
not
think that
the
was
first person to say that.
Oh no, I mean it was tragic. I mean, we had very good actors, but I felt like we were so constrained for a whole lot of reasons that it was quite disappointing. And Data was the only place where we were allowed to, this was a character who was allowed to make mistakes, to explore, to be a different kind of, I mean, I think it's a real tragedy when the robot is the most interesting character on your show. So I thought Brent did a great job with the character, and I just found him really interesting to write for. I mean, I always felt so bad for Jonathan because Jonathan's a very good actor, as he proved in Measure of a Man, but he never had anything to do, I mean, if you look back at original Trek, there was such energy and dynamism between the characters because they weren't all perfect, and they squabbled and they disagreed, and you never doubted that they cared for each other, but there was headbutting, there was conflict, and there was no conflict on Next Generation. I mean, maybe I have a confession to make. I've never watched an episode after I left the show at the end of the third season. It just, I was kind of so burnt out. But when I was there, I mean, it was like, our people are perfect. They have no flaws. Well, I don't know how to write interesting stories about people that have no flaws.
That's not interesting to me.
No, it's not interesting. And the beauty thing of Measure was that there was real conflict there. There were stakes that mattered instead of external stakes. I mean, the other thing I really disliked on the show and made the mistake of saying in a meeting one day was I really wanted them to decide that the holodeck caused cancer, and they had. I thought it made for lazy writing. Mm-hmm. And I also thought, if I'm on a starship exploring the galaxy, why are these people in an empty room playing with themselves? I mean, seriously? I mean, this was like, okay, I hate this. And of course, then it would break down all the time and take over the ship. And I thought, the first time it happens, you're never going to use that thing again. You know? And so that made me crazy. You know, that was one of my complaints is that, please, no more holodeck stories, you know.
Of course, the holodecks featured in quite a few sims on SB-118. But I think it's mostly used during what we call shore leave, when the characters are doing character development as opposed to on a mission.
Right.
So,
right. But again, why not go to a planet? I mean, like, why does it have to be?
Okay, so you don't like the holodeck. I will agree, it's overused, but at the same time, I think a lot of people find the concept fascinating. And I think part of it is because we can't go to the stars in the way that you can in Star Trek, and so it's, I don't know. And maybe it's, as humans, we always want more.
With a show called Avenue Q.
Avenue Q? You mean the Broadway show?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I'm very familiar with Avenue Q. I've actually seen it.
Yes, I saw it in Broadway, loved it dearly, but I kind of feel like the song "The Internet is for Porn"
Yes.
is really what the holodeck show was probably going to be for. Because I can't imagine any other, possible use. But so no, I mean, I can understand why drafting stories there is appealing, because then you can have people pretend to be Sherlock Holmes or whatever. Yes. But it drove me crazy. I mean, I hated it. So Probably a good thing that I never had to write a holodeck story. I
can understand where you're coming from too. So I say, if you could have been a character in Star Trek or filled any position, what do you think you would have been? Or who would you have been? An alien? Would you have been a Terran? What position on the starship, or maybe a StarBase, would you have filled?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, this is going to sound weird. I think I would actually have really liked to have been on security. And I know red shirts always die, but I always felt like you got to be the first people on the planet, I mean, the away teams, that was kind of the cooler thing. And being the bulwark to defend the officers, I think that would be kind of cool. And you would have been, sort of in the mix on everything, everything. Every time something goes south, they were going to call for a security guard. So I think I probably would have liked to have been in security.
A lot more action that way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, otherwise, I think you're, if you're a Huru, you're answering the telephone. Or as in Galaxy Quest, I have one job on this ship. It's stupid, but, and navigation, I mean, all of these other things. I mean, I just think that if you're doing security, you're probably getting to be in the middle of stuff. So I would probably be a security officer.
Would you have been Terran, or would you have chosen a different race?
I probably would have been Terran. I mean, my only other option that I would really like would be Andorian, just because I thought they were cool. I loved them because they were blue and they had
the antenna.
Yeah, the antenna. And so, but I'd probably be Terran. I know how to be Terran pretty well.
Now, at one point, then we're kind of veering off of Star Trek, and we're kind of coming to the end of the interview, but I have to know, there was in the works at one point a Wild Cards movie.
Well,
it's still in the works. Okay. It's still in the works. What's going on with that?
It's sitting at Universal. It's in development hell at Universal. I'm actually waiting. I probably am going to call the other. George and Gregory Novak and I are exec producers on the project, and I wrote the first draft of the script, and then, of course, they hired somebody to rewrite me, and then nobody liked the rewrite. So now they're looking at another script, a wild card script that I wrote a few years ago, which I actually like better than what Universal wanted me to write. And, I don't know where it is. We'll see. My fingers are really crossed that they like what they see. And, I'm hoping we'll hear something We haven't heard anything this week. I'm really hoping by first of next week we'll have some idea. It's still alive. So I wish, I personally, I would rather see it be a TV series, but if it was a movie first and then became a TV series, that wouldn't be bad either. I love the characters, and I love the universe. Obviously I love it. We've been doing it for way too many years.
Many years.
Yeah, and George shouldn't be taking time with it at all because of Song of Ice and Fire, but he loves it, as I do.
And there are a lot of people, I think a lot more people read it than you guys might realize. It's a really excellent series. Now,
and I think the reboot, I think the new books are really, George and I really know how to do this now.
Right.
We were sort of fumbling in the beginning, and now we really know how to do this. And we've got just a terrific lineup of writers. And we've got Paul Cornell, who used to write for Doctor Who. We've got Daniel Abraham, Carrie Vaughn, who writes the Kitty books. We have some Ian Tregellis, who's a brilliant young writer. We have some really great writers, and I'm really proud of the new younger generation, Wildcard. And also, I have a character who I just love, my British assassin, my cynical British assassin. He's so much fun. I would love to write more about him because he's such an SOB, and to write.
Now, what about other series? Are you working on any others right now?
I have a book series called the Edge series, EDGE, Edge. The first book is called The Edge of Reason. The second book is called The Edge of Ruin. And the new novel is called The Edge of Dawn. And what happened is they came out a few years ago with kind of really meh covers, and they didn't do very well because they're kind of occult thrillers and urban fantasy with a male hero. And so Tor reissued them with brand new covers, completely repackaged them. They have these great covers by Chris McGrath. They reissued book 1 in April. They're reissuing book 2, which is The Edge of Ruin, in July. And then the third book, August 4th, Edge of Dawn, will be released. All 3 books are coming out very quickly. I would love to write a 4th book because I know where I want to go, what the next iteration is, but I need to talk to Laura and my agent about that. So that's happening.
And that's a genre that seems to has become more popular in recent years.
It is, and I'm very pleased. I have a British publisher as well. The books were sold in Britain, and I got a lot of good reviews from Publishers Weekly and some other place on this third book. It seemed to be getting, so I'm hoping the books will find their market now, and that I'll be able to do more of them because I really like the universe and the characters. So that's the Edge series. And then I have a new 5-book contract with Titan Books in London, but the books will be published in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Britain all at the same time. And it's a big space opera. It's set 500 years in the future. I've delivered book 1, and I'm writing book 2 right now. I had plotted it all out, all 5 books, and Titan stepped up and said, we'll buy all 5, so you can tell the whole story, which was great. Because so often they'll only buy 3, and then if the series doesn't do well, then nobody gets to see the end. This way, I know my readers will get to see what happens to Tracy and Mercedes. What happens to this couple, this big love story spanning decades. I start with 2 characters at 18, and it ends with them in their 50s. So as they go through civil wars and alien invasions, and all that stuff. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. And then under a pseudonym, Philippa Bornikova, I write straight up urban fantasies with a female protagonist. She's a lawyer in a vampire law firm in New York. And the first book is called This Case is Going to Kill Me. The second is called Box Office Poison. The third book is called Publish and Perish, but it's sitting at Tor, and unfortunately it's kind of I turned it in last February, a year ago in February 2014, and I still don't have notes, so I don't know when that book is coming out, which is a little unfortunate because I think it's probably killed the series with that big break between book 2 and book 3. But, it was an experiment. I had fun doing it. I got some really good buzz on it, but I enjoy my Edge books more. They're about the war between science and rationality and superstition and religion. So they're a little bit
What about in Hollywood? Do you have any more plans to work with them? I know you said that you kind of had a hiatus because of the whole writing pilots, but do you have any more plans of getting back into Hollywood?
Well, I'm hoping. I have written a new spec TV pilot based on my Edge books. I'm about to write another spec based on my space opera. And, I've got the wild cards thing still sitting there. So hopefully, something's going to bubble and happen. I mean, that's one of the reasons I have a place in LA too, is because I just need to have presence in Los Angeles. So if you want to work in the business, you kind of have to be out there. And so by having a home base out there, a second home out there, I can do that. It's just I miss New Mexico. I mean, I stepped outside last night at midnight after playing a video game for a while and stood there looking at the Milky Way because, I live outside of San Jose and there's no light pollution, spectacular. Yeah. So, I'm torn. My heart is torn in half. I want a teleport door where I can literally be in Los Angeles and then open the door and step through to my home in New Mexico.
You never know. I mean, look at tablets now. They were introduced in Star Trek way before they became reality. You never know.
And the communicators, in essence, we now. So,
What about if you had the chance to write a whole new Star Trek series? Do you have any thoughts about what you would do for that?
Oh, I wanted to do this. I want to do Starfleet Academy.
Oh.
I want to set the series at the Academy. Put it on the CW. Young cast, ages 18 to 21. Have it all be set at the Academy with Karens and aliens, and and then you could have them go off on cruises, brief stints on ships as they're working their way through school. No, I would absolutely do Starfleet Academy.
Wow.
That's what I want to do.
And that's a unique take. I've never seen anybody suggest that sort of point of view before.
I want to see how they create these people who are going to go out and represent the Federation.
We got a small glimpse. I have to admit, it's been quite a few years since I've watched The Next Generation. You got a tiny glimpse with Wesley Crusher in Star Trek Next Generation, but it was extremely small. It was just glimpses here and there.
No, I mean, you never had a sense of, it could be, I happen to really like the CW shows, The Flash, Arrow. I just think I really, really enjoy them. And I would, I just think if they were to put Starfleet Academy on the CW and we get a bunch of gorgeous young kids, that would be the show I would make.
What about some regular young kids? Them too, right?
Well, that's true. It's just that it's CW, so I know we wouldn't have any ordinary.
Yeah, SCW.
It's Hollywood. And now in Britain, that's one of the reasons I'd really love to do a show for British television, because you can have normal-looking people and even strange-looking people, and it's nice. But Hollywood is you're still going to end up with, that's just the way the business is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you. I really appreciate the time that you took with me today. You are such an interesting person.
Thank you.
And I've loved chatting with you. Thank you for spending time with us here at SB 118.
Happy to, guys. It was fun. And Amanda, I hope our paths cross at some point at a science fiction convention somewhere.
You've been listening to a special interview with Melinda Snodgrass on the SB 118 podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about the mind behind one of the Next Generation's most popular episodes, The Measure of a Man. Until next time, peace, love, and Star Trek.
And that is it for the month of January. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our present goal for this year is to get out a podcast every month, and our goal is to have another one to you in March. So stay tuned, check out the forums, and remember to enjoy your simming. Have a great day.